Thank you, Will, and good morning, everybody. What a terrific crowd we have. Students and faculty and young people and people who aren't as young as the young people. But we thank you for joining us today. Today we are celebrating Constitution Day, and most especially the official opening of the Comerford Collection. And we'll share with you about a little bit about that collection, which has been donated by the Comerfords. And if you have a chance just to sort of wander around, we have a number of the pieces on this floor and many more upstairs. I remember the first time I had the privilege of getting to go over to Jim and Camilla's house to see the collection. I was told that there were just a few pieces kept in the basement. But apparently that's the way the collection started, and the collection grew from hundreds of pieces to thousands of pieces, and outgrew the basement, ended up in the living room. And I think it was when the pieces started ended up in the bedroom, Camilla said, "Okay, it's time, Jim, to give it away." So we are thrilled to be the recipient of this just extraordinary collection. We have a special guest with us today, of course, Senator Isakson, who will make some remarks and then field questions. I want to thank in particular Jeff Kunkes and Jim Comer for helping bring the senator here today. And of course, the senator has been with us before. He's the 2009 honorary degree recipient that we awarded to him in the spring. And I think as he shared with me back then, his grandfather was on your dad's side. I think back in the teens, 1910, 12, helped build this campus, laid a lot of the stone for Mann Stadium and maybe other buildings. So I'm going to ask Jim Comerford to come up and to introduce the senator.
The highest compliment that President Bush 41, George H.W. Bush, could pay someone is that they were a good man or a good woman. And what he meant by that was individuals that focused not on themselves, but on what they could do, the ideas they could advance, the accomplishments they could achieve for others. In a shorthand, servant leaders. Johnny Isakson has given his life to public service. And if any of you here would like to find the personification of a servant leader and someone that has conducted himself consistently for the 40 years that I've known him with great civility and respect for the ideas and opinions of all, whether they agree with him or not. Let me please introduce not only a good man, but a very good man, Johnny Isakson. Now I'm going to take the privilege here because Johnny's going to speak on foreign policy. And I'm of the belief that there are few things more American than a political button. You can put a political button on and you can say, "This is my guy. I'm for him." And in the context of foreign relations, and in the context of this country, what a privilege that is and what a rarity that is. No one's going to come knock on your door in the middle of the night and do something harmful to you or your family because you put a political button on it. They might come knock on your door and ask you to vote for something. But the work that Senator Isakson does every day in helping us protect our freedom is tremendous. Now, this might come in handy at some point during the year, too. Thanks for being here, Jeff.
It's love political buttons. This is Jeff gives me a check and Jim gives me a button, and Mr. President gave me an honorary degree. I'm just honored to be at Oglethorpe University. And I I feel so much smarter being in this library. This is just a beautiful, beautiful building. Oglethorpe is very special to me. I remember as a young child growing up, my grandfather lived in Buckhead, when Buckhead was a little crossroads with Cowpath, if you will. He would bring me down to Oglethorpe to show me the work that he did when he worked on the stadium when he came here from Östersund, Sweden. He came here in 1903, went to Texas for a good number of years and laid stone and made cabinets, and then came to Atlanta and got a job as a stonemason with a contractor who built the stadium and a couple of the buildings. So Oglethorpe really has a strong place in my heart, and I'm grateful to be asked to be here today. I'm also grateful that some university would give me an honorary degree. I always hoped I could get an honorary one, because the one I earned was tough enough, but honorary is a nicer way to get it. And being from Oglethorpe just meant a whole lot to me. So it's good to be with you today. And Jim Comerford, thank you for your kind remarks. Your nice things that you said of me, notwithstanding whether they're true or not, could also be turned around and said exactly about you, because we have known each other for 40 years. I've seen you in the professional business of lobbying the legislature and working for the best in our state. I've seen you as a citizen work hard day in and day out to make the state better, and I just appreciate everything that you said, but most importantly, I appreciate and treasure our friendship. Jeff, thank you for that greeting when we got in the room today. That started my week off great, so I'm delighted to be at Oglethorpe. I'm delighted to be talking about foreign affairs and foreign relations, which I will for a few minutes, and I'll open the floor for questions, because I've always found that I'd rather answer what you want me to talk about than figure out in my mind what it is I think you ought to hear. You know, we have a great country for a lot of reasons, but the greatest is our Constitution. In 1787, when our Constitution was ratified, it was a document that transcended the ages. There were no computers, there was no internet, there was no space travel, there was no digitization, there was no nanotechnology, none of the things you and I take for granted today. Yet our Constitution was so flexible in the way it was written, but so protective in the way it's been interpreted by our courts. It has allowed this great nation to grow, to do space travel, to do nanotechnology, to find breakthroughs for healthcare and improvements and things of that nature, and do it all within the framework of a single document written over 300 years ago. And that is a unique thing to have happen. And on Constitution Day, I'm particularly happy to be standing to you to give this little lecture on foreign relations, but also on our Constitution, because without our Constitution, our country would not be where it is today. We would have long since collapsed, or we would have morphed into something much less, much different than what the United States of America is today. When those colonists came across the Atlantic and colonized the first 13 colonies in America, they created what became the states of America and grew from 13 to 50. We're a country of states. There had to be some document drawn sometime along the way to bind the states together when they needed to collectively negotiate in their best interest, yet to allow the states the independence that Americans sought when they left Great Britain. You ever thought about this? We have a state legislature and state government and municipal governments and county governments that manage the affairs of our country and our citizens all the way down to the local level. But can you imagine what it would be if we had to do our foreign affairs one county at a time? What if all 159 counties in Georgia were doing foreign relations with Great Britain or with Al-Qaeda or with whoever it might be? It'd be a disaster. You've got to have a confederation and a unified negotiator. And we have that in terms of the federal government. Trade. You know, Georgia's biggest business and most productive business and most profitable business is agricultural exports. What if every state was negotiating trade agreements on their own rather than the country doing it? It'd be a disaster. You'd have no trade agreements, or you'd have states fractured and fighting against one another, rather than being united, which is the key to our country and the key to our Constitution. So when Robert Byrd in 2004 amended the Appropriations Act with a little short 10-word amendment that created Constitution Day in America, he created a day for us to honor the document that is America, the document that makes us great. Now, I want to talk about three parts of foreign affairs, and then I'm going to open the floor for questions. The first is something called soft power. Soft power is the ability to use the influence, the wealth, the knowledge, and the ability of the United States of America to help countries that don't have the knowledge or the ability or the health to grow and prosper, and to be a friend and a partner with the United States of America, not a captive or a colony of the United States of America. That's critical to understand. Soft power is the opposite of hard power. Hard power is what happens when everything else fails and you use weapons, you use the military, you use bombs, you need airplanes, you have war. That's hard power. And you always want to be able to win whatever war you fight, but you never want to have to get in that war. You want to be able to negotiate your way to peace and prosperity and trade agreements because you have a viable country that can do so. So our Constitution designates to the Congress of the United States the ability to ratify treaties, to confirm appointments by the President of the United States, particularly in the judiciary, to make the laws that establish the commerce of the United States of America. It designates the navigable waterways as being the jurisdiction of the Congress of the United States of America, not the states. The Chattahoochee River flows through Georgia, starts in Habersham County and goes into the Apalachicola Bay in Florida. But its provinces, although it lies in Georgia, Florida, and Alabama, is the jurisdiction of the United States of America because it's a navigable waterway. The intercoastal waterway that goes up and down the Atlantic and Pacific is a navigable waterway, and the referee and the judge and the law enforcer is the Corps of Engineers in the United States of America. Just think if every state was negotiating their right-of-way through their state. It would be a disaster, and commerce would be impossible. So Congress represents the United States, where our collective interest is better represented by one than our selfish interest by ourselves individually. Now on soft power, we use soft power a lot to improve our plight as a country. I'll just give you one good example. I traveled to Africa quite a bit. Africa is the continent of the 21st century. The markets that our businesses in America will expand and grow in are not our own because they're premature in terms of their market share. But it's Africa where there are 1.5 billion people who don't have the quality of life improvements that you and I have. Pampers are a luxury in Africa. They're a mainstay in America. All the types of products that we've developed to make your health and your life better is something Africa is waiting to come to their continent. That's why Kimberly-Clark and lots of companies now go to Africa and manufacture and build and sell. It's good for the company, but it's good for the continent of Africa. I have spent a lot of time in Africa because I know if we can win the countries of Africa over to think like we do, they can be partners with us in the United Nations, so we have those critical votes in Security Council resolutions about the Palestinians or about the Israelis or about whatever it may be. We need all the friends we can get in the United Nations. We give them the most money, but we don't get the most respect. It's time we got the most respect, and the best way to do that is use our soft power, help empower nations and help them overcome their problems and their adversaries. So I've worked in Africa on a lot of, I'll give you two good examples. The Millennium Challenge Corporation, which was created by George Bush. Millennium Challenge is where the United States made investments in foreign countries in return for them making commitments. Ghana being a perfect example. The best pineapple in the world is grown in Ghana. I've sat in the middle of a plantation in Ghana and with a machete opened a pineapple up and eaten it, and it's the sweetest, it's the best you've ever tasted. But you couldn't get a Ghana pineapple to the United States of America because there was no way to preserve the shelf life of a pineapple, which is very short. The United States met with President Jonathan Mills, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, was a very good friend of mine, and said, Mr. Mills, we want to open up America to your pineapple. We want you to be able to get it to it and sell it to us. But you can't get it to us and sell it to us fresh because it'll perish before it gets there. You need refrigeration. So I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll loan you the money to build a 1 acre large, 43,560 square foot refrigerator. That you form a federation or a confederation of your pineapple plantations. You store them and ship them out of that refrigeration to the United States of America. We'll expand the shelf life by 3 to 4 months. We'll increase the business and the exports of Ghana exponentially. We build, and in return for that, we only ask you to be a more civil society, a more democratic society, a more respectful society, and do away with the corruption that's so bad in Africa. Jonathan Mills cleaned up Africa. We built the refrigerator. Today, there are Ghanaian pineapples in American grocery stores because of that agreement, and there are also people in Ghana who live and work in that facility and have good lives because of it. We used our soft power and knowledge about how to build a refrigeration system that big, leveraged it to get them to stop the problems of their country in terms of corruption, and ended up with a win-win proposition for the United States and a win-win proposition for Ghana. This year in Georgia, through the port of Savannah, 65 million metric tons of American poultry will go to South Africa. 65 million metric tons of poultry will go to South Africa, all going through the port of Savannah. Why is that going to happen? Because we negotiated a trade agreement called the African Growth and Opportunity Act with the continent of Africa that made great opportunities for African products to come into the United States duty-free, just as long as they tore down their barriers to U.S. products exported into Africa. The biggest product for us in Georgia and Delaware, the two largest poultry states, was chicken. But Africa wanted to have all the families have their own eggs and their own hens laying their own eggs at their house and not create competition with that. But that kept U.S. exports or imports into South Africa from ever going there. I negotiated with Chris Coons, Senator from Delaware, an agreement to the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which required them to open their markets domestic poultry in the United States. So this year, 65,000 metric tons is going to South Africa, all because of our soft power in terms of negotiating a quid pro quo and a reciprocal trade agreement with South Africa and with the continent of Africa. So that's the way you use soft power to your own benefit as well as the benefit of the people you trade with. Now there's another reason soft power is so important. It's a lot less expensive than hard power. You know, the two times in our history as a country when we isolated ourselves was prior to World War I and prior to World War II. In both cases, we ended up in the largest world wars in the history of our country. The most loss of death in the history of our country, except for the Civil War. And a lot of damage was done to Europe, a lot of damage was done to the Pacific, and it was all done because we played isolationist and didn't engage early when there was still time to stop an Adolf Hitler, or to stop the trends that were going on in Germany in World War I. Isolation will kill you. Engagement will save you. And our Constitution gives our Congress the power to negotiate collectively for our 50 states, to save them and allow them to prosper. And that is an awfully powerful thing to happen, and that's because of our Constitution and the way it works. Now also in terms of foreign policy, you talked about the threats to our country. I want to talk for a second about ISIL and ISIS and the threats in the Levant and the Maghreb. The Levant is the northern part of the Mediterranean. The Maghreb is North Africa. There are now 17 countries in the Middle East and the Mediterranean and coming around to the Horn, going around to Sub-Saharan Africa, where they now are in a religious caliphate that's run by ISIS out of Syria and out of Iraq. When we left Iraq, we created a vacuum and it was filled by bad guys, which was bad foreign policy on our part. Your foreign policy should always be the conversion of your hard power to the power of your soft power. If America had left enough troops to maintain the peace and tranquility in Iraq once the Iraqi people wrote their constitution, conducted their votes, and stabilized their country, they began trading with us and benefiting from trade agreements and the power of our soft power, ISIL would have never gone into Iraq. But when we created the vacuum that happened when we pulled our hard power out, our soft power never had a chance. And today, Iraq is now the capital of ISIL. And we have a problem that one day, sooner or later, only military and hard power can solve, because you can never negotiate with a mentality like the religious caliphate that exists out of Syria and out of Iraq. So your foreign policy is critical to follow up on the use of your hard power to see to it you prohibit wars in the future and prohibit the shed of blood in the future, and instead empower people to be liberated, to be free, and to have the ability to vote. Of all the things I've ever done in the United States Senate, the travels I've made, my trip to Iraq, 2 days after the voting took place in the first election they had ever really had that was legitimate, to walk down the streets of Gazaria, which I did, and make microloans to bakeries and to little businesses to get started again, which is part of our soft power, and to see the bakery owners and the shop owners and the laundry owners hold up their index finger with a purple ink and say, I voted. In Iraq, the turnout was somewhere around 89% on their first vote. In America, we're lucky to get to 50. We take for granted our democracy and our freedom in this great republic that we live in. But it's the use of soft power, to use our soft power and our ability to keep us prosperous and free, and then having the hard power we need if we have to fight, keeps America strong. And Congress is the gatekeeper for that. Congress ratifies the treaties, ratifies the appointments, and ultimately establishes the ground rules of war. The President of the United States has the ability to use military force on his own command. He's the Commander-in-Chief. But the War Powers Act causes that to come back to Congress within 90 days and be reviewed. So you have to have a resolution of the Congress to approve the engagement that you're in once that 90 days has passed. So Congress is a partner with the President once the President's made that decision in terms of the execution and the use of hard power and committing U.S. troops overseas. So when you sometime today open the Constitution, I hope you will, just read it. It's a short document. It was my kind of book. It was short. And those are the ones I always got. Big pictures, short, big print, short words, but it means it's powerful. Size doesn't determine what the power of a book is. The words determine the power. And our forefathers had the ability to recognize that these 13 fledgling colonies that fled England because of the central government oppression ever grew and prospered. There would be times their growth and prosperity could be in conflict with one another. We would never want our colonies fighting amongst themselves over trade, over navigation, over federal jurisdiction, and over the court system. So we wrote a constitution that allowed the federal government, which is served by the Congress and the House and the Senate, to take over the referee for those jobs. So we never fought amongst ourselves. And instead, our adversaries were always adversaries overseas. That is why it is the greatest living document that's ever been written. And if we ever lose it, there'll never be a country as great, as free, or as prosperous as the United States of America. Now, I learned a long time ago that when people start leaving, it's time for you to shut up and ask questions. So a lovely lady left and a student left, so I must have either said too much or class has started, Mr. President. But one way or another, I'm going to be happy to take any question you might have.
I'll
You're being our referee.
I'm going to help field questions. So who wants to start? Start in the back.
Hi, you said that ISIS had some sort of religious connotation. It actually doesn't, because the teachings of Islam are actually extremely peaceful. So my question is, why did you say ISIS?
Okay, I heard part of that and I didn't hear part
I
of it.
didn't hear the last part of I didn't hear the question part, so say it again.
Why did you say that ISIS has religious connotations when in fact Islam actually teaches peacefulness and to not force people to practice Islam?
All right, we got it. So she's challenging you a bit on your statement that ISIL has religious connections when the Islam religion doesn't necessarily.
Well, I appreciate the question very much because that's a $64,000 question. Islam is a religion of peace. ISIL, though, and ISIS are good examples of where radical Islam has taken a sect of the faith and used it for military principles, or in this case, jihad. The Muslim religion is a religion of peace. Nobody argues, well, somebody might, I don't argue with that. My senior year in high school, Ashfaq Azad from Pakistan lived with me for a year when he was a student at Dykes High School. He prayed 5 times a day, his prayer rug laid by our bed. I have a great respect for the religious faith of Islam and for Islam and the faith of the Muslim faith. I have no respect for anybody who would glorify the beheading or the killing of other human beings, either under the guise of religion or giving credit for religion. Whether it's true, a lot of things are done in America in the name of religion that are wrong, and that's what's happening in the Middle East in the name of Islam.
Thank you. Let me take another.
Senator, this is an election year, and
I knew there was something I was supposed to say.
staying away from partisanship, all of the statements being made from both sides are being heard overseas. And could you comment a little bit on what the overseas reaction has been to some of the comments being made by some of our candidates?
I can only respond to the ones that I've heard myself in conversations that I've had. One of them was Ashfaq Azad, who was my roommate my senior year in high school in 1962 at Dykes High School, who's now the Caterpillar dealer in Dubai, and is a Muslim. So we keep up with each other all the time. We've raised our families together. We communicate all the time, and I go back and visit him from time to time. To quote Ashfaq, he said, "Are you guys nuts?" But basically, people don't understand. American politics has always been a mystery to most of the rest of the world. And sometimes it's a mystery to those of us that are even in politics in America. But the fact of the matter is, our country has the most open, transparent, effective political system. It may not be perfect, but it's better than anybody ever invented. And from time to time, it's not pretty. But the end result of it is almost always better than any other process utilized by any other type of government in the world. But most of them don't understand American politics, and they think it's silly.
What's the status of TPP? Will it get through Congress before the election, or before the next president takes office?
Well, the president is pushing very hard to get TPP to be a legacy for his administration. Secretary Clinton and Mr. Trump have both said they don't want to take up TPP and are against trade agreements. Therefore, having any possibility of it coming up in a lame duck, I think, is impossible. And I think Mitch McConnell, the leader, has made that statement that he's not going to bring it up in a lame duck. Although I'll have to tell you, every commitment made prior to the lame duck is subject to change once the lame duck is reality, because it's all in who's got the votes, who's going to be in the majority, and who's leaving, and who's coming, who's staying, who's going. But it's highly unlikely it will happen in the lame duck. Now, my personal opinion is this. I would lots rather trade with people and have a jurisdiction covering that trade that makes sure I have fair trade and I have ways to enforce my rights, like the WTO, than trade one-on-one. It's kind of like the Constitution. Trade agreements give you a collective way in which to trade around the world or with specific parts of the world and have a remedy, a judicial remedy, rather than a military remedy. Best example being when the United States granted permanent normal trade relations to China, PNTR. China had to agree to go under the WTO when we did that. When we did that, China was stealing every textile manufacturer in the United States of America as fast as they could. Once China went under the WTO, we filed a case in the WTO to stop them from taking our industry and taking it as rapidly as they did. And we won 3 of the 4 cases. And because of that, we stabilized American textiles, although they were hurt prior to getting into that agreement. So trade agreements are really agreeing to the ground rules of trade. One other example, in the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which is TTIP, which is the agreement with the European Union. Now, after Great Britain left it, it's going to probably be the European Union and Great Britain as a separate third-party organization. But one of the reasons we would desperately need to further that agreement at some point in time is to get the regulation of trade consistent from country to country. Right now, you can't ship an American chicken into Belgium because in Belgium they don't allow chicken to come in that's washed with chlorinated water. Well, that's because we wash our chicken with chlorinated water in America. You can't let a foreign health standard be different from the health standard you're trading with to keep you from getting access to that market. You need a fair way to do it. So I hope we'll always look constructively and strongly at trade agreements, and when they're fair and when we have a remedy when we're abused, we ought to consider getting into them. But when they're not fair and there is no remedy, we never should. But as in the case of most things in Congress, it's one agreement at a time, one bill at a time, and you do thoughtful study and you do what's right for your country.
Congress will take it.
Senator, the 1-year anniversary from the Iranian nuclear deal. Knowledge of the year behind you, please comment on what actually happened as opposed to guarantees that were given as citizens, how Iran is using money and sanctions, and how Iran is becoming a player against us or with us after the 1-year anniversary.
I didn't vote for the Iranian deal. It came before the Foreign Relations Committee. As you know, the president decided not to take it to Congress. He decided to make it an executive agreement. It could be invalidated the day he's out of office and the next president is sworn in. It's not a law, it's an executive agreement. I voted against it for a plethora of reasons, but principally because it did not do what it purported to do. It purportedly kept Iran from developing nuclear weapons, but it only postponed it for 12 years, number one. Number two, the Iranians are not a trustworthy bunch. They've demonstrated that a lot of times before, and within weeks of ratifying, or the president signed the agreement with the Ayatollahs, they started firing missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads, which is a violation, prima facie violation of the agreement. So it was a bad agreement for America. It gave a country like Iran, who's capable of being just as dangerous or more just as dangerous mentally and more dangerous militarily than North Korea, the ability to develop a weapon and deliver that weapon to the United States of America. It was the wrong thing to do for our country, and I was proud I voted against it.
I hear some disagreements with the Republican nominee instead. Will the Republican Congress, or will the Republicans in Congress attempt to persuade, let's say, President Trump to not do what he says sometimes he's going to do?
Well, let me put it this way. Historically, without exception, in every administration I'm aware of in our history, and I've tried to study politics pretty much, and I respect the presidency and the Constitution, regardless of who got elected or how they got elected, once they got elected and they had the power to be president, and once members of Congress had the power to do what they did, they're almost always a matter of holding each other in check and balance. So I don't think there's any question, regardless of who's nominated president, some of the things they campaigned on will be something that will be challenged by the United States House or the United States Senate or both. That's just the nature of our country.
Let me follow up. Some presidents have made it a matter of party loyalty to support them in things that are, let's say, doing this constitutionality. And it's true of both Republican presidents and Democratic presidents. Will Republicans in 2017 thereafter, if we have President Trump, stand up for President Trump when it's a matter of either of constitutionality or party principle?
This United States Senator will never will never support anything that's against the Constitution of the United States, no matter who proposes, whether it's the president or whether it's the other party. I'm just not going to do that. I mean, that's not a part. The Constitution is not a partisan document. The word Republican and Democrat never is in the document. It's about the people of the United States of America, the states of the United States of America, and our people and the ones who represent it. So I would never support something that I felt like was contrary to the intent or the expressed understanding of the Constitution of the United States of America, period. Does that answer your question? Yes, ma'am. I think we have.
Yeah, hello, my
Hi.
name is you mentioned earlier about how, when you went to Ghana and then you tasted their pineapples and how sweet they were, and you wanted to open, export and trade of the pineapples into the U.S. We've seen, historically, when other countries open up trade with something that is like a staple, say like quinoa in, I think it's Peru. Prices rise because of high demand in like the U.S. in the countries where these people where these foods are staple. What is your say on how would we prevent that from happening? With the pineapples in Ghana, say. Imagine if that's like a staple for them. What is your say on preventing prices rising on a staple for those people so that they are able to afford their own produce in their own countries, and that we're not exploiting, I would say, their own.
Okay, good question.
It is a very good question, and I want to answer it by saying this. When it comes to agricultural products, scarcity is a good thing because you grow more of it. It ends up being a lower cost to the consumer, both where it's grown as well as where it's shipped. Peanuts in Georgia is a perfect example. Peanuts back in the 1960s became an international trade commodity of high import because of the protein that it has. We've always been the leading peanut producer in the country, but now we do so by far because we created so many foreign markets for our peanuts, but yet you can get all the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches you want in Georgia as well. So the price ultimately did not go up. Now it might spike a year or two after an increase in demand because of trade, but in the end, supply and demand works. Demand will chase supply, and supply will stop when demand ceases, and equilibrium becomes the price. So I don't think it's a negative to the people that produce it. I think it's a positive thing because it creates jobs for them on top of everything else.
Yep.
You mentioned earlier how you thought that, or that you believe that, especially considering Africa, and you're mentioning getting pineapples, that by creating trade and by giving these African nations that are so impoverished money, we're incentivizing the idea of democracy for these countries. But then you also slightly contradicted yourself by saying that in the case of Iraq, we got rid of our hard power by taking the troops out and didn't allow them to fully become a democracy. But I guess what I'm asking is, how does that, I guess there's just a contradiction there just because there's so many statistics otherwise that show that the incentivizing of especially poor third world countries with high food scarcity don't equal democratic nations, and we're just fueling these faux democracies without really delving into whether or not these democracies are legitimate or not. So I guess what I'm asking is why do we require the hard power in countries like Iraq, but we don't require it in countries like Ghana or South Africa or whatever?
Well, first of all, Ghana, to my knowledge, has never been a threat militarily or civilly to the United States of America or to our citizens. In Iraq, Saddam Hussein possessed, we knew, some chemical weapons and some weapons of mass destruction, and allegedly was threatening to use them, and did use them against the Kurds in northern Iraq. So I think there's a world of difference between a country that is not a military threat or a threat to your citizens, and a country that's actually threatening to extinguish and exterminate people because of their sex or religion or race. So I don't think there's any inconsistency whatsoever. I think hard power was absolutely necessary to go after somebody who's going to commit genocide. Stated that they would do it and actually did it against the Kurds versus a country providing food service and food longevity for the pineapples in Ghana to help them grow their economy.
To follow up, I guess what I'm really kind of going back to.
Talk a little louder, please.
Sorry, I guess to follow up, you also mentioned something about respect and how that has been lost in especially third world Africa. And I guess really what I'm saying is just, I guess it's not as easy to grant that same respect, even if you are receiving so much aid, if the country is still corrupt and the country is still receiving all this money. And it's not necessarily about whether the country is a threat to the United States, but in relation to the idea of foreign policy and what you said earlier about making these countries more democratic and thinking like us, I don't see how that's effectively going to do that. Does that make sense?
I would never tell a beautiful lady she didn't make any sense. I also don't think I ever used exactly those words, but if I understood the question right, we are a democracy, and we have democratic principles that we believe in, and we have a constitution that we believe in, and we have a Declaration of Independence which clearly stated out what we believe our Creator endowed us with. We try and spread around the world our beliefs, not to control people, but to give them the chance to self-determine a better future for themselves. They may do it through a parliamentary form of government rather than a legislative form of government. They may do it through some other form of government, but it's the principles of democracy that we believe in that are so important to spread, because when you're talking about peace rather than war, you're talking about hunger rather than, satiating hunger rather than having famine. Those are good things regardless of your government or your religion. So I don't think anything I said was inconsistent. I want to always try and promote peace and harmony, and I think democracy is the route to do that. But I always want to also have the hard power necessary to back up the soft power that we use. That's probably the best way to say it.
Go in the back.
It seems sometimes from the outside that the conflict between states' rights and strong federal government has gotten more and more pronounced, and I think you see that in the election. But I was wondering, as someone who's had a tenure in the Senate, if you've seen that as well, and what do you think, how we best address that constitutional balance?
Well, the best way to address the constitutional balance is to remember the three-legged stool of the United States of America. We have a judicial, a legislative, and the executive branch. The executive branch is the President of the United States, who can declare war and establish his policy. The legislative branch is the United States Congress, the House and the Senate, that govern the regulations and rules under which we all function. And then there's the Supreme Court of the United States, and there's several courts under it. They call the balls and strikes in terms of who's right, who's not, if there's a conflict. The problem we've had lately is the President of the United States has chosen executive orders rather than the legislative branch to do a lot of things that were legislative in their nature and not executive order in their nature, and therefore we have a two-legged stool of government that's falling over because the two-legged stool won't stand up. We need to go back to respecting the Supreme Court, the power of the legislature, and the ultimate power of the presidency, and have the Supreme Court call the balls and strikes when we have conflict. That's the best answer I can give you.
What's you want to share a little bit about the Supreme Court?
It's all politics. I think that sums it up better than anything I could possibly say.
Would you accept an appointment to be the ninth judge?
No, I know what the Peter Principle means, and I think I've been promoted to the level of my competency. Any higher than that, I'd probably be incompetent. So I'll leave that to a jurist and a law school graduate and a distinguished attorney.
I'm going to go in the backpack.
Yes, sir.
Wanted to say, Phi Alpha fellow, say anything.
Well, Phi Alpha, brother.
Thanks for coming here to Oglethorpe University.
I helped found the chapter here, by the way. In fact, my father was in the first class that was initiated as a senior alumni.
Oh, wow. Didn't know that one.
Y'all behaving yourselves and doing good?
We're doing
Good.
great.
I asked that as the president before I asked you, if I want to be sure you tell me the truth.
My question is kind of building on the Iran question. That whole Obama deal aside, wanted to ask, seeing that Iran has one of the youngest demographics and very computer savvy and more educated, younger population, even they got close to democracy prior to that communism, before the Ayatollahs came to power. What do you think is the correct ratio of soft power to hard power that you discussed earlier to kind of break the iron grip that the Ayatollahs have on Iran, essentially move from an adversarial kind of relationship to somewhat of an ally?
Well, that is an outstanding question and a good one for me to end on because it's a comprehensive question. Iran is a nation of great people ruled by a handful of crazy people, in my judgment. And that's my words, not anybody else's. We have hoped, as America has hoped, and most of the free world has hoped, that the Iranian people would ultimately get what they want in terms of freedom and liberty and get out from under the oppression of the Ayatollahs and the current Iranian government. That has not happened today. There have been attempts, I am told, and I'm at liberty to know some things, I'm not at liberty to know other things. I don't know what I'm about to tell you as a fact, so don't anybody, Greg Bruce, can quote me as this being a fact, since the paper is here. But there have been elements to use soft power to influence the Iranian people to believe they can rise up and self-determine their future and not remain under the severe thumb of the Ayatollahs. That has been unsuccessful, and their recriminations against the people in civilian society in Iran have been severe and awful and graphically awful. It is still our hope that through some combination of soft power and international pressure and economic pressure, which the sanctions did for a while until the president entered into the Iranian nuclear deal, which lifted the sanctions, which gave them $1.4 billion into their economy, and they immediately pumped it into Hezbollah and some of the bad guys in the Middle East. But eventually, if we can get soft power leverage well enough, we can get an internal feeling of confidence of the Iranian people, and then the outside world has got to be willing to go in and help them. When that happens, I don't know, but I hope it happens for those people sooner rather than later, because Iran right now is a proxy in most of the negative things that are happening in the Middle East. There are about 5 wars going on in the Middle East right now, and 3 of them are Iranian proxy wars, which you're nodding your head. I think you probably agree with that statement. But it's my hope the Iranian people will ultimately get what they've always wanted. That's the type of freedom and liberty I was talking about in answering this lady's question back here. Democracy for the Iranian people would be far better than the religious pressure that goes out of the Ayatollahs right now. Good question, thank you. Mr. President, thank you for having me. Mr. Comerford, Jim, thank you for making this donation to a great university. If I can ever give any help to you, I'm the only Isakson in the book that spells it with a K, and I'm in the phone book, so call me.
Before we, and John, you're going to have to help me with this, with the, how are we officially open? How's the collection opening? What's the process here? Is there just
Actually, anyone who would like to see the Comerford Collection, most of it is housed on the 2nd floor, and after we break here, Mr. Comerford has generously said he will lead a tour, so,
okay.
It is a very, very interesting collection, and I encourage you to come up and listen to Jim for a few minutes about what's contained therein and its historical meaning.
Sure. And we're going to recognize this with a sign of the plaque. It'll be on the 2nd floor. So again, thank you, Camilla. Thank you, Jim, for this wonderful gift. And thank you all for joining us.